Good morning. My name is Jan Caldwell, and I'm the Public Affairs Director for the San Diego Sheriff's Department. And a couple of housekeeping tips. We're happy to have you all here today. There's water in the back if you'd like that. Restrooms are right around to the side if you need those. And please silence your telephones. We would appreciate that. We're going to have a panel today. We're going to have 4 speakers. After that, we're going to have a Q&A session. Please keep your questions till that session, so all the speakers can present their material. And then when we're done with that, we're going to have 15 minutes for one-on-one if you'd like those kind of interviews. So now I'd like to introduce Sheriff Bill Gore, San Diego County.
Good morning. I'm Sheriff Bill Gore, and I want to thank you all for being here this morning. Let me start by introducing the people who have joined me here in the front of the room. To my immediate right is Commander Mike Lawton from the Coronado Police Department. Chief Lou Scanlon would have been here this morning, but he's on a scheduled trip out of the country. Next to Mike is Dr. John Lucas from the Medical Examiner's Office. On the far right is Mike Grubb, Director of the San Diego Sheriff's Department Laboratory. On my immediate left is Dave Nemeth, Sergeant with the Homicide Unit, San Diego Sheriff's, and Captain Tim Curran from our Central Investigations Unit. Getting feedback from that. On Monday, July 11th, paramedics and Coronado police officers responded to a 911 call at 1043 Ocean Boulevard in Coronado. They administered emergency medical care to 6-year-old Max Shacknai and transported him to Sharp Hospital in Coronado. They then took him to Ray's Children's Hospital in San Diego. The Coronado Police Department immediately began an investigation into the cause of Max's injuries. On Wednesday, July 13th at 6:48 a.m., another 911 call brought paramedics and Coronado police officers back to the same Coronado residence. Rebecca Zahau, who resided at this house with Max's father, Jonas Shacknai, had been discovered hanging naked from a small bedroom balcony with her feet and hands bound. Because of their limited resources and our long-standing partnership in conducting suspicious death investigations, the Coronado Police Department requested the assistance of the San Diego County Sheriff's Department. A sheriff's homicide team, along with crime scene investigators from our lab, responded, processed the scene, and began an investigation. Tragically, Max succumbed to his injuries on Saturday, July the 16th. The investigations of Max Shacknai's and Rebecca Zahau's deaths were worked cooperatively with the San Diego County Sheriff's Department, Coronado Police Department, and the San Diego Medical Examiner's Office. Our purpose here today is to publicly report the findings with regard to the Rebecca Zahau and Max Shacknai deaths. Earlier this week, we met personally with both Rebecca and Max's families to provide our findings and answer their questions. I'd like to point out that the Shacknai and Zahau families have been cooperative and approachable every step of the investigation. There's been a lot of speculation about this case. Normally, we wouldn't comment on an investigation of this nature. However, the intensity of the local, national, and even international media, coupled with the unique circumstances surrounding Rebecca's death, suggested otherwise, and that's why we're here this morning. Our responsibility is to answer one very important question. Were these deaths the result of criminal conduct? Was Max's death a homicide? The answer is no. It was a tragic accident. Was Rebecca's death a homicide? Again, the answer is no. It was a suicide. To reach these conclusions relied in substantial measure upon the physical evidence, the scene of each event, witness interviews, the medical evidence, and the forensic evidence, including DNA, fingerprints, and biomechanics. They are all compelling and all point persuasively to a single conclusion. These deaths were not the result of any criminal acts. The conclusions presented today are based on good, methodical, investigative work and science. Science is our best witness in this case. Science is not biased, and it does not lie. I've asked the people that have joined me here this morning up front to give you the details of the investigations that led to our conclusions. And we're going to start with Commander Mike Lawton from the Coronado Police Department.
Thank you, Sheriff. Good morning, everybody. First, I'd like to say on behalf of the City of Coronado, we send our condolences to the Shacknai and the Zahau family. We know that this is a very tragic set of events that occurred in the beginning of July involving both families, and we want to make sure that they understand that we understand our condolences go to their family. We also would ask, because of that, that you allow them to go through the grieving process and respect any privacy that they request. I'll start my presentation with a little bit about Max Shacknai. Max is a 6-year-old son of Jonah and Dina Shacknai. He's 45 inches tall, which is 3 foot 9 inches, and he weighs 57 pounds. There were two, as the sheriff indicated, there were 2 calls for service at the house, one on July 11th and one on July 13th, 2 days later. I'll cover the July 11th call. This involves the injury of Max. The Coronado Police Department received a 911 medical aid call on July 11th at about 10:10 in the morning. The call came from the sister of Rebecca Zahau. This is a 13-year-old sister. She was on the phone and she reported that a boy had fallen down the stairs and was not breathing at the house. Immediately, our dispatchers transferred that call to Heartland Communications, which is the fire paramedic dispatch for Coronado Fire. Our police officers arrived 2 minutes later, and fire department arrived 1 minute after that. Max was found by our officers and then eventually to Rady Children's Hospital within about an hour and a half. The 2 people inside the house at the time the officers arrived were Rebecca Zahau and her 13-year-old sister, as I indicated before. They were the only persons inside the house. Also inside the house there was the Shacknai family dog, the Weimaraner. The staircase chandelier, and you'll see it later in my presentation here, was lying on the floor beside Maxfield. It had broken glass, and in addition to that, there were 2 soccer balls and a child's scooter also laying in the same area. The statements that were given to our officers immediately at the scene indicated that Rebecca Zahau, who was in the house, heard a loud noise, came to find Maxfield on the floor at the bottom of the staircase with the chandelier beside him. He was now breathing. It's important to note here that no one witnessed the fall. No one witnessed the fall. Rebecca found him after the fall. I want to add that that day, immediately the Coronado Police Department, because it was an unwitnessed accident involving a kid, we responded our investigations unit out to the scene immediately. We began taking photographs of the stairwell and the scene. We actually interviewed people at the scene and also later at the hospital, the family members that came to the hospital. This is in regards to the unwitnessed accident. Okay, that takes care of July 11th scene. I'm going to go to July 13th, 2 days later. We received another 911 call from the residents. The 911 caller was Adam Shacknai. He is the brother of Jonah Shacknai. He indicated to our dispatchers that he had found a woman hanging from a balcony inside the courtyard at the residence. We immediately responded, police officers and fire, and arrived and found Rebecca Zahau is deceased on the ground. As the sheriff indicated, she was bound with her hands and legs, and she had a rope around her neck, but we found her on the ground. Immediately, the Coronado Police Department could tell that our resources were going to be expended to the maximum in this case. So we made a call to the County Sheriff's Department, which is a standard procedure for us. They responded out a homicide team and an evidence team to assist us in the investigation. We worked together because of the close proximity of both of these cases, the unwitnessed fall on Monday and the incident on Wednesday. We worked together on both cases. Forward to July 14th, Thursday, the day after Rebecca was found. Our investigators received information from Rady Children's Hospital that Maxfield's condition was worsening. Up until that point, the information that we had from the hospital and the family was that his condition was stable and that they were optimistic. This changed that dynamic. Our investigators responded immediately to Rady Children's Hospital to conduct an interview, and we additionally photographed Maxfield at the hospital. Tragically, as the sheriff indicated, Maxfield did succumb to his injuries and passed away on Saturday, July 16th. As the sheriff indicated, both of these investigations involved collection of evidence and forensics. In the death of Max, one of the important things that we received was during our interviews, we got information that it was not uncommon for the children to play in and around the staircase and the hallways at the top and the bottom. Some of that was evidenced by the soccer balls being in the area as well as the scooter. All of that would have been consistent with the information we got in statements. In addition to that, as I explained earlier, the dog was found at the house on Monday. The dog was actually on the first landing, and I'll show you that in just a moment, when the officers arrived. So he was present at the area of where the fall occurred, the dog was. The chandelier that was found at the scene that I indicated showed a broken chain at the very top of it, and it had obviously crashed to the ground. It was clear from our investigation initially that Maxfield had fallen from somewhere in the staircase, but the fall and the actions prior to the fall had been unwitnessed, and that was our job to find out where that occurred from. The injuries that Maxfield suffered, along with the evidence collected at the scene, showed to us that it was consistent with a fall from the second floor. And I'll show you in just a moment the second floor and the height and where we believe the fall began from. Okay, this photo is a photo off the internet, so it's not a photo that occurred at the time of the accident, but I think it demonstrates for you a good picture of the staircase and the chandelier where it had been, where it would have been prior to this accident on July 11th. The staircase is a two-story U-shaped stairwell with the first flight, let's see here, right here, where my red marker is. Then a landing, as I described, right here. That is where the Weimaraner was when officers arrived on Maxfield's call at the landing. And then an upper staircase that goes up to the second floor, which is over here to the left. This is really just to show you the condition of what it would have appeared probably prior to the fall. It's another photo. This is one of our photos. It shows you standing on the first landing and looking back down towards the front door. Get a good picture of the foyer area. It's important to note that the floor in that foyer area is a concrete floor with carpet on it. When we conducted our investigation, we found evidence of the chandelier, some of the evidence of the chandelier, evidence of the chandelier down here in the bottom area of that landing, in this corner where this post is. And that's important to note, as well as evidence of broken chandelier glass down in the alcove at the bottom. which would have been back in this corner here. And that's very important in terms of our conclusions. Okay, this photograph on top, it has a graphic on the bottom. It shows the same staircase that we were describing. Maxfield was found in this area. The evidence I talked about in terms of the glass was found back in the alcove there and back over in this area. The graphic below gives you a depiction of where we believe the fall began from, based off the evidence that was collected in this investigation. The evidence is the evidence that was at the scene, as well as Maxfield's injuries. Okay, this final graphic is a graphic of what we believe happened based off the physical evidence in the case. Shows what we believe Maxfield falling from the staircase where the second stair railing meets the banister at the second floor, going over the top and coming down, and then hitting his head on the floor at the bottom. Falling to the floor and striking his head was an important part of this investigation, and Dr. John Lucas will explain that further in terms of the conclusions. The Coronado Police Department and the Sheriff's investigation in Maxfield's death indicated that there was no evidence indicating any kind of foul play in this, that it was a tragic accident, and we've ruled Max's death an accident. The Coronado Police Department would like to thank the Sheriff's Office, the Medical Examiner's Office, the District Attorney's Office, and the California Department of Justice for their assistance in this investigation. And I want to reiterate to you, this is a tragic loss of two people. The Shacknai and Zahau family are still grieving, and it's important that the public and the media understand that. Now I'd like to turn it over to Dr. John Lucas.
Thank you, Commander. Good morning. Let me begin by saying that the Medical Examiner's Office also offers its condolences to both families. The sudden, unexpected, and certainly violent loss of a young, healthy loved one is one of the worst things that a family can endure. And we certainly appreciate their patience and cooperativeness throughout these investigations. Max Shacknai ultimately died as a result of an injury of the upper cervical spinal cord, that's the top of the neck, right below where it exits the base of the skull. The injury was a spinal cord contusion, and I'll explain this injury in more detail shortly. Based on the injury patterns, Max fell and struck the carpeted floor face first. He had a group of abrasions and contusions indicated in the diagram on the screen on his right forehead and around his right eye, and he had an underlying fracture of his frontal bone right along the midline. An impact on the forehead is the type of force necessary for this type of fracture. If these were the only injuries that he had sustained, he may well have survived the fall. However, that impact caused a bending of his upper cervical spine, of his upper neck, a hyperextension, or bending of the head backwards, as if you were to look at the ceiling. That bending caused injury of the spinal cord, but did not cause a fracture. The injury to the cord at this high level resulted in interference with heart rate and or breathing, explaining why when paramedics found him, he had no heartbeat and no respirations. The lack of oxygen to his brain during the 25 to 30 minutes of aggressive resuscitation resulted in irreversible brain damage, despite the fact that a pulse was eventually regained and he was hooked to a respirator. By then, the damage had already been done. He died of that brain damage 5 days later. The only other group of injuries that Max had were on his back. A series of repeating abrasions or scrapes, roughly corresponding to his ribs or spinous processes, those bumps that run down the middle of your back. These injuries and those of his head and neck are consistent with the scenario just shown to you by the Coronado Police Department. There was no evidence of a struggle, and toxicological testing of blood drawn at Rady Children's at a mission detected no alcohol, medications, or drugs. So based on the law enforcement investigation, the physical evidence, and the autopsy findings, the cause of death is rather long. It's anoxic ischemic encephalopathy, as you can see here, due to resuscitated cardiopulmonary arrest, due to cervical spinal cord contusion, due to blunt force trauma of head and neck. And again, in more simple terms, he suffered an injury to his upper spinal cord that stopped his heart and lungs. That resulted in brain damage during the period of time before his heartbeat and breathing were restored. He then subsequently died from that brain injury 5 days later. We're certifying the manner of death as accident. Thank you.
Can you go back to your one slide? I just think it's important to comment about the one with the diagram of him falling over. Nobody here is, none of the investigators or the medical examiner or the biomechanics expert we had to look at this is suggesting that Max went to that railing and threw himself over. The best we can come up with his body weight and the force it would have taken to go across that area to the chandelier and impact the railing on the other side is that he was running down the hall, which we were frequently told that they did. They played in that area, and something caused him to trip, whether it was a ball, whether it was the dog, or something, that he then tripped and fell over that railing, grabbing the chandelier, twisting him around to where his back impacted the rail on the other side, went down to his knees, and then to his head. Without that being witnessed, that's the best theory that we can come up with the medical examiner, the investigators, the forensics involved, as to what happened and the cause of Max's death. Now I'd like to turn it over to Sergeant Dave Nemeth from our homicide unit, who will discuss the death of Rebecca Zahau.
Good morning. I would like to echo Coronado Police Department and our condolences to the families. These events were tragic, and I'd also like to echo the request that we respect their grieving process. I'm Sergeant Dave Nemeth. I supervise the team that conducted the investigation into the death of Rebecca Zahau. Behind me, you'll find diagrams that are pertinent to my presentation. They include a diagram of the balcony from which Rebecca was found hanging, a scene diagram of the room to which that balcony was attached, and of course a diagram of the courtyard where Rebecca was ultimately found. During my presentation, I may refer to these diagrams to give you a clearer picture of what I'm speaking about at the time. This is Rebecca. She's Asian female, 5'3½", 100 pounds. She was born in 1979, was 32 years old, and she was the girlfriend of Jonah Shacknai, who was the owner of the home. On July 13th, the Coronado Police Department requested assistance from the Sheriff's Department regarding a suspicious death at 1043 Ocean Boulevard in Coronado. Sheriff's Department personnel arrived about 9:20 in the morning to begin the investigation. Investigators and support personnel from the Sheriff's Department, Coronado Police Department, and the California Department of Justice attended the briefing. We learned at that briefing a nude and bound female was found hanging from a balcony in the courtyard by the homeowner's brother at about 6:48 in the morning. We also learned the homeowner's 6-year-old son was in a coma at Children's Hospital due to injuries resulting from a fall. You'll see here an overall view of the mansion, this being the main house, the caretaker's living quarters with the garage below, and this is the guest house. Here's the courtyard. The balcony is roughly here. Rebecca was found roughly here on the grass. Preliminary information I'm providing for you to give you some perspective are things that happened just prior to the event. The last outgoing call from Rebecca's phone was found to be to her own voicemail at about 10 minutes to 1 in the morning. We know from the investigation that message that was left on her phone was to inform Rebecca of Maxie's grave condition and imminent death. We also know that that was in contradiction to previous more positive reports she had been receiving regarding his condition. I'll start with the outside scene, give you an idea of what we found outside, and then I'll move to the inside scene and give you an idea of what we found there. Outside, we found Rebecca. She was laying on the lawn in the courtyard, roughly where I described previously. Her wrists and ankles were bound with red rope, and her hands were behind her back. The same red rope and a t-shirt were around her neck, and the same red rope was hanging over the balcony railing. There was a table below the balcony and a kitchen knife on the ground near Rebecca. The investigation showed the knife and table had been used by the reporting party to cut Rebecca down when she was discovered. Adam Shacknai, the homeowner's brother, was the reporting party and had been staying in the guest house at the time. Inside, when we approached the door to the guest room to which the balcony was attached, there was a message painted in black paint on the door leading to the room. I am going to show you a picture of the door. We will not be revealing what the message said. That's roughly the height of the message. Continuing inside, the red rope, was found secured to the footboard of the bed. There were 2 paintbrushes, one of which had black paint on the floor near the bed. There was also a tube of black paint found under a plastic bag on the floor near the bed. There were 2 kitchen knives, one large and one small, also on the floor near the bed. And the side of the bed to which the rope was attached had been pulled away from the wall. Here's a picture. You can see here the leg of the bed to which the rope was attached. Down here you can see a paintbrush, which happened to be the one that had the black paint on the bristles. Here's another paintbrush. The tube of paint was found under this plastic bag. Here's the large knife and the small knife. And you'll notice the rope extends out in this direction, which is toward the balcony. The red rope went out the double doors leading to the balcony and over the railing. Foot and toe impressions were found on the balcony tile, and the dust which had settled on the railing had been disturbed. There was also a boot impression found on the balcony tile. We identified the source as that of a police officer's boot, and we recovered that boot. There were no other disturbances found on the balcony. This is, again, a picture which I had shown previously, showing the rope extending toward the balcony. The rope continued through the room, through the balcony doors. These doors were open at the time of the incident, and the rope goes over the balcony and down to the courtyard. This is a picture of the balcony. This bracket here shows an approximately 11-inch disturbance in the dust on the railing. And here, there's another disturbance, which was where the rope was laying over the railing. This is a picture of the balcony showing, here's the boot impression, which we matched to a police officer's boot. Toe impressions here, and foot impressions here. And as you can see, these feet, the heels are together in this fashion. Got a better picture of it over here. Gives you a little bit better idea. You can see the outline of the foot here, where the toes are. Here, where the toes are. Better picture here where you can see them. This is a picture here where the toes are next to the balcony, which is a blow up of this area here. And of course, here's the boot impression. Evidence was collected and ultimately examined in this case. The black paint from the door, the brush, the paint tube, paint found on the victim's hand and torso, and on the rope around her neck were all the same paint. Fingerprints from the guest room entry door, the door jamb itself, the balcony door, the large knife, and the bed leg directly next to the rope were all from Rebecca. DNA profiles from the victim's bindings, both her hands and her feet, the rope around her neck, the rope attached to the footboard of the bed, and the small knife were only from Rebecca. And I'd like to point out that the crime lab personnel that did this analysis focused very strongly on areas that would have had to be manipulated to accomplish tying a person up in the manner that we found her. I can also say that the knots, the slip knots that were on the feet, the wrists, and around the neck were all of the same type. Foot impressions from the balcony were consistent with the size of Rebecca's feet and consistent with her ankles being bound. Disturbances on the railing were consistent approximately with the width of Rebecca's torso. She was very petite. And the smaller disturbance to the right was consistent with the size of the rope. Toe impressions on the balcony were consistent with a person moving up next to the railing, leaning forward, and going over the railing. And as you can see here, these toe impressions that were found next to the railing, you can see a furrow here, a little bit of a furrow here, as if the toes had slid backwards. No additional evidence or information was received during the course of this investigation to believe foul play was involved in this event. Numerous witnesses were interviewed. All were cooperative and were confident in their truthfulness. The autopsy results supported the findings of the investigators in this case. And I'll let Dr. Lucas go into more detail on those. We interviewed a witness that reported she had contact with Rebecca in January. Having observed Rebecca had lost weight, seemed stressed, was not sleeping well, and was not exercising, which was normal for her. She was what could be described as a health nut. She exercised a lot. She had also engaged in conversations with the same witness regarding problems she was having at the time. This was supported by a journal we found on Rebecca's phone, which in writing expressed many of the same things that she had told this witness in January. And last, we received information from witnesses that Rebecca was distraught over Maxie's injury. Before I go into conclusions on this, I would like to say that no one witnessed this event. We don't know exactly how this event occurred. We don't know in what order things were done. The only person who can answer that, unfortunately, is deceased. Based on the evidence we have, based on the information we received during the course of this investigation, this is the best conclusion we can come up with. Rebecca received news regarding Maxie's grave condition at about 10 minutes to 1 in the morning. She made the decision to take her own life. She located a rope, possibly from the garage. We found a shelf in the garage that had boating items, and the rope was of the type you would use to tow a person on an inner tube or something of that manner behind a boat. There was a void on that shelf. It was a full shelf up until a certain point where there was a void about that wide that was empty. The homeowner wasn't sure if there was a rope in that location, but it's possible that's where she found the rope. She removed her clothing or was already unclothed, perhaps coming out of the shower, painted the message on the door, cut the rope into sections, and secured the rope to the bed. She bound her feet, placed the rope in the shirt around her neck, fashioned her wrist bindings, and secured her hands behind her back. Rebecca moved out to the balcony, leaned forward over the railing, and fell. We conducted an experiment to determine if it is possible for a person to secure their hands behind their back in the fashion we found. This was after all the evidence we received and after all the investigation we conducted. This question we had to answer. We had to see if this was possible. And we have a video to show you, because we videotaped the experiment, to show you what we found. The person depicted in this video is roughly of the same stature, size as Rebecca. The bindings you see were the result of painstaking study of the bindings that were on Rebecca. We used the actual bindings without untying them. And that is as close as possible as we could get to recreating those bindings. The rope is also of the same type. And what you'll see here at the end is this rope is a little tighter, this one is loose, which is consistent, which is what was found at autopsy. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Sheriff Gore.
The rope through the fingers, too.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, it's okay. Actually, I'll be turning it over to Dr. Lucas briefly. However, I also like to note that when she was found in the courtyard, the rope, the portion of the rope that you would have to pull on to tighten it, as you saw in the video, was found through her fingers, still grasped in her fingers. I'll turn it over to Dr. Lucas. He can discuss the autopsy results.
Thank you.
I also performed the autopsy on Rebecca Zahau. As you've heard now, she was found hanging nude, fully suspended, with her ankles bound and her hands bound behind her back. There were 3 separate portions of the rope, all apparently from the same rope, and what those were used. There was also a long sleeve T-shirt, like a light cotton T-shirt that had been, the sleeves had been wrapped around her neck. It was loose and not part of the asphyxia or the neck pressure component of this case. She did die of asphyxia due to hanging, and based on the autopsy findings, she was alive when she went over the balcony. The injuries on her neck were consistent with a drop the distance from the balcony to the end of the rope, which was just about 9 feet. This is as opposed to the quote-unquote usual type of hanging where somebody drops only a few inches or eases their weight into the ligature. There were also scattered abrasions or scrapes on her back and legs, and these were consistent with her impacting or interacting with large plants under the balcony against the exterior of the house. And you can see that in the exhibit there marked courtyard in the top photo. There was no evidence of a struggle or sexual assault, and there were no other significant injuries. The bottoms of her feet were dirty, consistent with having been standing on the balcony. There was no toxicological or physical evidence that she was rendered unconscious or incapacitated prior to the hanging. Finally, her hand was easily removed from the wrist bindings. I personally removed it, and it was just a simple matter of slipping her hand out. The bindings were not tight. And as was already pointed out, the end of the rope that would have been used to tighten the bindings was actually in one of her hands. I'll be the first to admit that this was a unique and unusual case, and I've personally investigated many suicides and homicides of various types. We have to look past the unusual appearance of the death and focus on the facts and the evidence. Based on the totality of the investigation, the physical evidence documented by the Sheriff's Department, and the autopsy findings, our office concluded that the cause of death was hanging and the manner of death was suicide. Thank you.
Okay, we'll open it up to questions now.
There's reports that the family found that there was a note, that she left a suicide note that the family is claiming doesn't match her handwriting. Can you comment on that?
That was as Sergeant Nemeth pointed out, that was the painted message on the door, which we're not going to divulge the contents of.
But you would characterize that as a suicide note on the door?
Yes. Sure. Well, it's difficult to say. It's not a clear suicide note. It's what's the word I'm looking for? It's a message, I guess, the best you can say. No.
Sure. You guys give a lot of information today. Obviously, we all had a chance to see it all in totality. A lot of people at home, of course, have been speculating from the beginning on this, as you might imagine, because of the uniqueness, as you guys have pointed out. For those who are at home who didn't get a chance to see this entire presentation, obviously no one knows 100% for sure because no one actually saw both of these things happen, but it seems like you guys are extremely confident.
Yes, I'm confident with the results of our investigation based on the interviews, based on the physical science. And say science doesn't lie. That's why I'm so confident here.
Sheriff, have you ever seen anything like this before?
I will say this type of a suicide, for example, it's unusual, but I don't think it's unprecedented. We uncovered articles that have been written on naked suicides. So to say that this has never happened is not factual, but it is unusual.
You said a witness said that she lost a lot of weight, she seemed stressed, was stressed out. But then again, when Max, the news of Max came just 2 days before her death. So what led to her losing weight and all that stuff that must have taken longer than 2 days for all that to happen and add to her depression?
Yeah, we're not going to go into the details of her mental state. That's personal information, and we're going to respect the privacy rights of the family. But there were indications that she'd been unhappy for a while.
And the knots around her hands seemed pretty, was that kind of an expert knot? Was it any kind of knot that you would need experience to know how to tie, or did it seem amateur?
As best we can tell, there was nothing in particular expertise required.
There did not appear to be anything expert about it. You couldn't really attribute it to any type of a known knot used in the commercial industry or anything like that. I would say, in all honesty, if Rebecca were to tie it a second time, she would probably have difficulty reproducing it.
Sure. Rebecca's sister still doesn't believe this, regardless of the scientific evidence that you have in your confidence. I know you presented the evidence to her sister. What was her reaction? What do you say to her now when she's saying, no, my sister didn't kill herself?
Well, I think as everybody's pointed out here, we don't know the emotional strain that all these families are going through. It's got to be, these are very tragic events. We laid out the case extensively to them in Missouri, answered their questions, and it's unfortunate she can't accept the results. These are the results to the best of our ability. I can't explain why she doesn't accept them.
The family is, as you know, they're having a very difficult time believing this is a suicide, and their contention is this is a rush to close this case. What would you say to the family of Rebecca with regard to the amount of effort put into investigating this case?
Well, when I talked to family members, I told them that we were not going to rush this case. We were going to take as long as it took, leave no stone unturned, do every interview, examine every piece of evidence. And in this case, we did. It took a little longer because of the toxicology reports to come back. We interviewed every pertinent individual that needed to be interviewed. I think, and I'm confident, and I told the family members, I wouldn't make this public until I was personally satisfied that we'd done everything we possibly could, and in my opinion, that was done in this case. And I'm, to be quite honest, very proud of the work done by Coronado Police, the medical examiner's office, and our homicide unit.
Who made the call to Rebecca that you mentioned, the voicemail?
I'm sorry?
Who made the call to Rebecca, the voicemail about Max's condition?
We were leaving that?
We're not going to release that again. That's private family information. She did receive the message from somebody close to her.
Sure. And we don't have the exact message. It was erased, but we talked to the person that left the message, and it did report accurately on Max's deteriorating situation.
Sure. Has anybody been given a polygraph, and if so, who?
If there was a polygraph given, and I'm not going to discuss who, we're not going to discuss all the details of the investigation, but where we felt it was appropriate, a polygraph examination was given.
Two questions. One, was there anything in her system? And secondly, given all the questions about this case and the notoriety, why won't you reveal the message on the wall?
To answer your first question, there was nothing in her system at all.
No alcohol?
No alcohol.
And as for...
In cases of suicides, law enforcement in general, and this department in particular, does not release the results or the contents of suicide notes.
Sure. Did you tell the family members what the message said, and if you did, what was their reaction?
We did discuss it with the family members, and I don't want to discuss their reaction to it.
There was a report that Max was planking when he fell. Have you heard anything about that, or is there anything to that?
I have no idea where that came from. It was not represented to any of the family members by any of the investigators involved in this case.
The exact language of the suicide note was given to the family? The exact wording was given to the family?
Yes.
There was has speculation somewhat been frustrating with the investigation? I know, as you mentioned, or one of you guys mentioned at the beginning of this all, obviously it's garnered some significant coverage. That I don't think it hindered the investigation, I assume, but what's that been for the department? It seems like there's been some frustration coming out here and there because of some people speculating, including obviously the sister.
It's anytime you have a major investigation that draws a lot of media attention, it's an issue that we in law enforcement have to deal with. It wasn't a distraction. It didn't hinder us from doing our investigation. It maybe took up some time of some sergeants and lieutenants dealing with people of the press, but that comes with the job. We understand that, and that's why we're here today. If this had been a suicide without all the media attention, we wouldn't be here, as we all know. But I think we felt strongly that because of the publicity, this case did attract, and the unique nature of Rebecca's death, that it warranted this type of release.
Did you have
Sheriff, does this mean that the investigation has concluded and no criminal charges will be filed?
Yes.
Thank you.
We had
an interview with Mary Zahau yesterday, and she said that they learned of the death of her sister by Jonah Shacknai, not from law enforcement. Is that standard? Or she raised it as an issue.
I couldn't tell you. Do you know who notified the?
The medical examiner's office ultimately is responsible for notifying the family members in the event of death. It could very well be that because we were conducting an investigation, that notification was delayed, and Jonah obviously had this information early on. He could have passed it on.
I don't think it's surprising at all that Jonah would call the family members of Rebecca and tell them what had happened.
That she committed suicide.
Well, I don't know what words he used. Yeah, Roy?
Did you show that video to Rebecca, to her family?
Yes.
Yes.
Were you able to determine where Jonah was when all this happened?
Yes.
Can you say where he was?
He was at Children's Hospital with his son.
Was that on surveillance?
Yes. We've confirmed his whereabouts at Children's Hospital. Go ahead.
Sergeant, did Rebecca ever visit Max in the hospital? Was there ever any, other than this voicemail, was there ever any kind of confrontation between Rebecca and Jonah, or any kind of verbal exchange, blame for the kid's death, anything like that would have triggered this or added to it?
No. And she never had the opportunity to visit Max.
She never went to the hospital?
No. She did drop some people off, picking people up at the airport, dropping them off. She never got the opportunity to go in and visit Max.
Did you figure out why she took the dog then to the kennel? Because apparently it was to go to the hospital.
We believe, based on witness interviews, that the dog was kenneled because she realized there was going to be a lot of activity going on, and it was one less thing that she would have to worry about.
Are you aware of Dina Shacknai's location during that night? The mother of the child?
Yes.
Where was she?
Where she was?
She was at Children's Hospital.
Where was Rebecca when Max fell? What part of the house was she in? Do you know?
Rebecca was, from her statements, was in a restroom in the house, right near where the stairwell is.
Did she feel some sort of negligence because of the fall?
I don't know. I can't answer that question.
What her feelings were. I mean, obviously, she was responsible for watching Max, and I think she probably felt responsible, like any one of us would, if a child in our custody had an accident like this. So.
Where was the 13-year-old?
Did she express that during the interviews with the Coronado Police Department? That she felt concerned or responsible for what happened to Max?
In our interviews with Rebecca on the day that Max was injured, she was obviously distraught. Remember, she was the person who found Max. So obviously she was distraught. I don't know that I could characterize it the way you did, but she was distraught.
Does the message indicate in any way that she blamed herself for what happened to Max?
I'm not going to go into the contents of the message. Go ahead.
Investigation to the father's background business-wise?
No.
Do you know how long it took to respond from the restroom to the boy on the floor? Was there a delay? Did she go right over there? Or was she in the shower? Or
No, she was in the restroom, not in the shower. The delay would have been moments. The restroom is within feet of the stairwell. How soon The phone call came in relation to that. We believe it was within a minute or two, but we're not certain, and neither are they. They were in obviously a very emotional situation at that point.
Now, was the 13-year-old playing with the boy or nearby, or where did she respond from when this happened?
The 13-year-old was not playing with the boy at the time, and actually was in a different part of the house taking a shower.
The witness who told you that Rebecca was losing weight, all that stuff. How close is their relationship? Are they family members? Are they friends?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, the witness gave you a description of the state of Rebecca before her death, even before the 2 days when she was losing weight and stressed out. What was her relation? Were they
She was
family members?
She was close to Rebecca.
Sheriff, wait, there's a question in the back.
Go ahead.
Sheriff, so many people have said, how does someone tie their hands? How does someone round their feet? We saw the video. But have you read many articles in suicide that people have done this? Research, you said you read suicide articles.
Well, there have been articles written on people that commit suicide naked. Specifically, their hands bound was not discussed in this article.
I can address that.
Go ahead.
You know, our office is the office that would investigate all the suicides, and I even personally have seen cases where people have bound themselves, actually gagged themselves, and it was a very clear, well-documented suicide. And beyond our experience here in San Diego, there's plenty of reports, albeit, I mean, this isn't something you come across every day, but it does occur. It's well documented. And people do it. The thinking is that they bind themselves so that they won't change their mind midway through. So it's again, it's unusual at first glance, but it does happen.
Back here. Hold, go ahead. Wait a minute. Excuse me. Let's go on some.
You've been able to confirm the whereabouts of Dina and Jonah through surveillance or whatever other measures that they were at the hospital, and Adam was the only one in the mansion in the hours preceding her death. Would it be safe to assume that it was Adam that took the polygraph, and did he offer, or did you make the request?
We are comfortable with Adam's story and where his whereabouts were, and that he was not involved in this. So you can assume what you'd like to assume.
So you are not going to divulge who took
No.
the polygraph?
There was one polygraph
Wait,
test?
excuse me. Go ahead.
They just reported there was 372 suicides in San Diego in a given year. Out of those 372, how many of those suicides had the hands tied in the back, or how many also the feet and naked and the hands tied in the back? Of those 372.
Or what are you referring? I'm assuming you're referring to last year, or maybe I'm not sure what. So any number, if you're trying to last year, I am aware of none.
Doctor, when people do bind themselves behind their back, do they always tie in front, or how does that work? I've never heard of this before.
Again, my own personal experience is limited because it's uncommon. The one case I've had before, the bindings were wrapped clearly from behind. But I'm sure, human imagination is pretty limitless, so I think that it's possible that some of the other reported cases out there, they've been bound in front and then moved to behind. People bind their hands in front and leave them there. Maybe they step through the wrist. I mean, there's going to be a lot of possibilities. But again, my own personal experience, I've seen now 2 cases personally where the hands have been behind the back when found.
I'm sorry, Sheriff. Just to be clear, did you say that Jonah Shackley was at Children's Hospital the whole time that this chain of events occurred?
Well, we know during the evening that we speculate she committed suicide. We know that Jonah Shackley was at Rady's Children's Hospital.
In the hours in which you
Yes.
the chief?
Yes.
Some questions about Rebecca's death. You said the cause of death was asphyxiation. Was her neck broken, and how long did it take her to die?
Her neck, referring to her vertebrae, were not broken. Her death, I can just simply refer to most hangings in general. People will lose consciousness in a matter of at probably 10 or 15 seconds at a minimum, maybe a little longer, but certainly under a minute, and depending on how tight the binding is. And then death usually ensues within 15 minutes or so. Irreversible brain damage will occur in that time period. But certainly unconsciousness happens pretty quickly.
So how much time, now you said her hand could come out of the binding if she wanted it to?
Yes.
You took it out?
Yes.
So how much time did she have to change her mind?
It would have been pretty quick. I think she would have had to change her mind pretty quickly.
Mary, Rebecca's sister, indicated she spoke to Rebecca hours before her death. And according to Mary, she didn't seem to be depressed and she was making plans for the following day. In your experience, is that consistent with someone who still goes ahead and commits suicide?
I think you have to put that in context that at about midnight or shortly thereafter, she received a message that Max's condition had taken a turn for the worse and he wasn't expected to make it. So I think that, you know, no matter what she said to her sister earlier, her frame of mind around midnight had obviously changed.
Sergeant, when was those phone calls, those last phone calls? Was there only two, one from the sister and the voicemail? And what order did those come in? Or were there more phone calls that night?
The last phone call on Rebecca's phone was outgoing to her voicemail at 10 minutes to 1 in the morning.
And the sister calling her, did you have a record of that night?
Not after 10 minutes to 1 in the morning.
Before that?
That was before that.
It was before that.
Do you know when the sister
I do
called?
not know what time that was.
Excuse me. Go ahead.
To her own voicemail.
With her when she received that phone call, or
$6:48 in the morning.
So there's no time of death for...
Well, it's, I'll let the doctor estimate as best he can.
Yes, and of course all I can do is give you an estimation. Based on everything available, I'd say best guess would be before 3 o'clock in the morning. It could be a little bit after that, but I would say that she had been dead probably for a few hours when found.
I think what's important is you have to look at the totality, is what we tried to point out here, of the evidence in concerning Rebecca's suicide. The DNA, only her DNA on the rope around the bindings, her fingerprints on the knife, the footprints on the balcony, and nobody else. No drugs in her system that she could have been drugged and then thrown over the balcony. There's really no other logical explanation for what happened to her except she took her own life.
You were asked about whether she had any confrontations in the hours prior to her death with Jonah Shacknai. What about any other member of the Shacknai family or anyone else for that matter? Is there any indication or information that there was angry words exchanged?
None that we know of.
You mentioned that witnesses told you that she was distraught about Max's condition. Can you talk about that, considering that the sister said she didn't appear despondent? You know, if you can't identify the witnesses, what did they say? What did they hear from her, and when?
Well, what we've said is that we know that she got a voicemail at about midnight or somewhere there after, talking about, telling her Max's condition had deteriorated and he wasn't expected to make it. As far as her mental state, there was a friend that talked about some depression she had, and then there's the phone journal, the journal we found in her phone that supports that. That's friend's statement. So other than that, we don't have a date of the entry, as I recall. Is that correct? We do not. We don't know what the date of the entry was. Go ahead.
I mean, I know that it's an
Now
old
we're back
house.
to Max's, the railing inside the house?
Yeah, the railing that he went over.
Right.
The railing on the second floor was approximately 30 inches, a little different in 30 to 32 inches. However, right where the banister railing met the stair railing coming up from the first floor landing, it drops down to about 20 inches. And that's around the location where we believe that the fall began.
So it's a dip of 20 to down to 20.
From the top step,
Right.
If you're on the top step going, the first step going down, it's 20 inches.
Would that be up to code if it was built today?
I don't know what the code is, but I would say it is a low,
36 inches.
it is a low banister at that point, a railing at that point.
Yes, ma'am.
If they have lawyers present.
Yes. They cooperate in every interview. And I don't recall, I don't think they had, I know that when we briefed them on the results of our investigation, they had lawyers, but I don't believe they had lawyers when we initially did our interviews. Correct me if I'm wrong on that.
During the initial interviews.
Do you know why Paul Finks was there that night or next day?
No. Do you know?
No. I don't know.
Do you know who Paul Finks was representing?
I have no idea.
Just on this round table that was found underneath, it was missing a leg. Do we believe that Adam dragged that over and the leg broke off while he was dragging it? Or when she fell down and he cut her down, did that break the leg?
Based on statement that we received and based on a piece of broken wood from that table that we found, that table was dragged over there to so he could stand on it to cut her down.
And the leg broke on the way over.
The leg broke on the way over, and there was a piece of wood that we found that matched up with the leg.
Okay. Roy?
So you said that it sounds like Max was running and he tripped and he fell. Is there any chance he was trying to run and hang on to the chandelier? 6 years old?
It would seem uncharacteristic from what we heard from the family members about Max. We don't know. We know that from our biomechanic expert we talked to that he probably had to be running to get that velocity to carry him to the chandelier and then across to the railing where it appears that his back impacted.
But we don't know whether he was trying to grab onto the chandelier.
No. We don't know if he took a running jump and was trying to grab it. It seems out of character for what we've heard about Max.
Could he have been chasing the dog?
We don't know. The dog was, as you've been told, in the area.
What's the distance between the two railings?
The angle from one,
From the one he fell over to the one you think he hit his back on the bottom?
a little over 9 feet, and the height of that from the railing, the top railing of the second floor to the floor is 13 feet. So your question about whether he would be jumping off to swing on the chandelier is probably not. It's highly likely that he wouldn't do that at 13 feet.
Clearly, if he tripped and he fell over, like any of it, we're going to try to grab something to break our fall, and it appears from the physical evidence, the position of the chandelier, his back, that he grabbed that and it broke loose from the ceiling, propelling him towards the right side of that the staircase.
Can you talk about Jonah Shacknai's reaction to all of this? Did he have any doubt at all that she committed suicide?
As the investigators in the room, and I personally talked to Jonah, he's gone through a tremendous tragedy, as you can imagine, with his son and his girlfriend. I'll let him speak for himself. I believe he's accepted the results of our investigation, and he's just trying to deal with the tragedy and his personal tragedy he's gone through.
Did he question?
No, I mean we had a long conversation with him, laid out all the details of both Max's death and Rebecca's suicide, and I believe he's accepted our results.
But before that, did he question when it initially happened?
No, I think he was. My conversation with Jonah, he was waiting for the results of our investigation. Sure, he wanted to know what the toxicology, what the DNA showed, all those exams that we were doing. But when we presented that to him, I believe he accepted our results and is trying to get on with his life. Yes.
I think you said that Rebecca's fingerprints were on one or more of the two knives, and I'm wondering if you know what she was doing with the knife.
Well, she was cutting the rope.
Into sections.
Right. Right.
And then
We're assuming the knives were used to cut the rope, and that's why we found her fingerprints.
big one.
The large knife had fingerprints, the small knife had her DNA.
Okay.
I think we mentioned initially the California Department of Justice was involved. What was the nature of their involvement, and do they agree with the findings?
They have a person assigned to our homicide team.
Actually, we we have an entire team that works with us. It's the Bureau of Investigation and Intelligence Major Crimes Team. They have a total of 5 investigators. They work with us. They do have space in our office that they use. However, they work with all agencies in San Diego County upon request. They provide manpower and other resources to assist us in our investigations.
Sergeant, how many words were in that message that were painted on the door?
I don't recall. It wasn't too many.
Sergeant, there has been a lot of speculation in this case, back and forth, suicide, homicide. We had a family commit suicide, and right away it was announced there's a suicide note. We had a guy shoot a cop. Right away it was announced there was a suicide note. Why, with all the speculation running around, why wouldn't you, right from the beginning, say we found a suicide note and we don't know if she wrote it or not? Why wasn't that put out right away?
I'm not sure you can define it really as a suicide note. It's a message.
But you know why wouldn't that clear things up right from the
No.
get-go that it's much more likely a suicide, or we're not going to tell you what?
I mean, there's all types of evidence we could have put out. Only her footprints were on the balcony, and just, put that out piecemeal to the media, which I don't think would have been productive, and it probably would have hindered a thorough and complete investigation. So we prefer to get all the information out at one time so we can give you our best conclusion and not, well, we think this could mean something, we think it could mean that. It's better to get all our facts together and make sure we've covered every base and then release our results.
And Commander, are you going to release the 911 tapes now?
No, we are not going to release the 911 tapes.
Autopsy reports?
The autopsy reports are public documents.
The suicide notes are message would not be included.
That what was written on the door was not in the report.
Okay, go ahead. We'll come back to you.
Questions. You characterized it as a message. Who was the message to?
We can't determine that.
And what did the family say about the message? What did Rebecca's family tell you?
I'm not going to go into that.
Okay. My last question is for Dr. Lucas. I keep hearing Max's condition characterized as suddenly deteriorating. Rebecca gets a message that she's suddenly deteriorating. If I understand that he was found not breathing, and all of these things were diagnosed, didn't they understand right away that his injuries were catastrophic? I mean, is that a fair way to, do people suddenly deteriorate?
That, I haven't treated patients in a long time. But my understanding is that the brain damage that occurs is a process. And although there was no doubt initially that the injuries and his situation were serious, I think that at least clinically there was a change in whatever parameters they were following to make them change their minds as to his ultimate course.
And I think there's always, not being a doctor, looking at a bedside manner, I think you always try to be as optimistic as you can with family members. And sometimes family members hear what they want to hear. I think all of that goes into it. And then when the doctors finally did, make some statements, then that's when that voicemail was left. Go ahead.
Before Max's fall, was any information on his state of just a typical 6-year-old boy? Was he upset about anything? I mean, I know he's 6, but what was his, what was he like before his accident? Is there any information?
We have no reason to believe he's anything but a happy, healthy 6-year-old little boy. I'll turn it over to Commander Lott.
The information we have verbally was that CPR was performed prior to the fire department and the police arriving. When we got on scene, there was not CPR occurring. So whether it occurred or not, we're uncertain.
When they found Max, when Rebecca found him, he was face down. the 911 operator, when she was told that he wasn't breathing, told them to turn him over, and when the paramedics and police officers arrived, he was on his back. So whether she had tried to do CPR or whatever, but
Commander, did I hear you correctly earlier that it was 25 minutes that he didn't have oxygen to his brain?
Well, the call was at 10:10 in the morning, and he was taken to the hospital from the scene by the fire personnel, I believe. I don't have the exact time, but it was around 10:30. And somewhere on transporting to the hospital and his arrival at the hospital, they got a pulse back. So that's, I think, what Dr. Lucas is referring to in terms of the time frame.
25 minutes? 25 to 30 minutes of resuscitative efforts prior to him regaining a pulse.
One last thing on the message. Are you characterizing this as a message or a suicide?
I think it's best characterized as a message. If I just saw that on a wall, it wouldn't indicate to me that somebody was going to kill themselves. On the other hand, when you take the totality of the evidence and the fact that somebody hung themselves inside that door, then you could draw that conclusion. But it's not a clear suicide message.
Would you characterize it as apologetic in nature?
I'm not going to characterize it. Go ahead.
How many
Go ahead.
search warrants were served? Are you inclined to unseal them now? No, one of your just go to the judge and say, okay, they're unsealed, or are we going to have to go to court and have a hearing over this?
Well, the search warrants aren't going to be unsealed. We served one search warrant on the house. Coronado served a search warrant on the house, and there were many search warrants served on phones.
So how many total do we know?
I don't know.
And then none of them are going to be unsealed voluntarily?
No.
Let me point out that the PowerPoints you witnessed today, along with the other material we've talked about here, are available, I believe, now on our website.
Including the video?
Yes.
Photos?
Yes.
Yeah.
Everything you saw, guys, middle.
Yes.
Right now? Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Isn't it true that the 13-year-old was taken to the hospital after Max was taken away? Is that a true report?
Yes, she was taken and had some stitches taken in her leg.
Why did she have stitches?
She wasn't taken to a hospital. She was taken to a clinic. And the information that we received through interviews indicated that after the investigation that Monday morning, she was assisting in cleaning up the area and cut herself on some glass on that chandelier.
Okay. Roy? No, that's why it was so important that we talk to them. And this last week has been spent talking to Jonah in one meeting, and then Dina, and then flying to Missouri again to talk to the family members there, so that they didn't learn anything new through the media. But everything that we've revealed here, there's obviously photos that we're not putting out. This kind of goes to the heart of why we think it was an accident in Max's case, why we believe it was a suicide in Rebecca's case.
But knowing that it's not criminal, then you have to have all these details being told to the public. That has to be really hard. I mean, it's one thing to tell them all that, it's one thing to telling us and telling everybody else that. That has to be terrible.
No, it's been a very emotional experience for everybody involved in this investigation. We all have kids ourselves, and we're dealing and trying to be sensitive to the concerns of the Zahau and the Shacknai family. There's been some very tearful conversations, I can tell you personally, and I'm sure that the investigators have had the same thing. So, again, as everybody has said, our hearts go out and can't imagine the losses they're dealing with, but it's a balance between the extraordinary amount of media attention this case got, as we say, local, national, and international, and not wanting to appear like we're trying to cover something up. We felt it was important to get these facts out. As you have read, the Zahau family, some members of the Zahau family have found it difficult to accept that their sister committed suicide, and they're going to probably do their own investigation. No and no.
Sergeant, was there an alarm engaged in the house the night that Rebecca died? And can you talk a little bit about when Adam arrived at the house and what he was doing that night that Rebecca died?
When Adam and Rebecca arrived at the house, it was after she had picked him up and brought him in the house so he could sleep. He had
From the airport, or?
No, she picked him up at the airport, took him to the hospital so he could be with Jonah. She then picked him up there and brought him back to the house so he could sleep. They parted ways. He went to the guest house, she went to the main house. And he slept in the guest house that night. He woke up, went through his routine, getting ready for the day, and when he came outside, he found her.
Do you know if there was an alarm engaged in the house around the time she committed suicide or that night?
No.
No, there wasn't, or no, you don't know?
No, we don't know.
Was there any forced entry into the house, any windows or anything? Okay. No.
Do you know why Rebecca didn't go in the hospital and see Max? Had the hospital placed family-only restrictions, or why didn't she just walk through the doors and see this boy that she loved?
Well, on one hand, Rebecca was busy. There was a tragic event that occurred, and she was, like I said, picking people up at the airport, shuttling people around. So she had a lot of things going on at the time. The other side of it, that's a private matter between the family.
So there were family issues. I mean,
I don't-
clearly you said that she's been to the hospital. Parking the car and walking in isn't that difficult.
Right. Yeah, I'm not going to comment on that.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Is there an alarm system for the house, and if there is, was it turned off?
There is an alarm system in the house, and it was not used, regularly not used.
Okay.
One journal that was found in the phone, or were there multiple journal entries in there? There was one journal.
And was it physically written in the phone, or was it a program?
Physically written in the phone.
How long was the journal entry?
3 pages.
And you weren't able to determine who or when it was written?
No. The phone she had, apparently the software needed to extract certain data from that phone is not yet available. It was a very new phone.
Is there any past history of suicide attempts by Rebecca?
Not that we know of.
Depression, antidepressants, anything?
We're not going to go into any of her history.
You said there were no medicines in her system at all?
That's correct, and that includes many antidepressants.
Okay, let's get a couple more. Got one right here.
Took a lot of things out of the house in the beginning, just some carpet or a mirror or a painting. Why were they taken and what was found?
Sorry,
Taken,
Must not be
items
carried
taken out of the house.
Just the door.
There are photographs of people carrying, of detectives or investigators carrying things out of the house. One was a roll of carpet, and I think one was a painting. I think this was after perhaps after Max's fall or Rebecca's death.
You would have to ask me for which investigation. We took the door out of the house.
You took what?
The door from the guest bedroom out of the house.
That had the painting on it.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
We took the door out of the house that had the message on it.
Oh, right.
But
Yes.
yes. Okay. Go ahead.
Would you cut on if she took sleeping pills, and also if it was a somniferous or any other particular thing for her to sleep, and also is there 100% assurance that it was a suicide from the medical point of view, or there is a margin for error or the submission of something that is missing?
We do routinely detect sleeping medications. She had nothing in her system. As for a margin of error, I would say that I am as confident as I've been in any case that this is a suicide based on everything. I'm not going to say I'm infallible, but based on everything, I'm very comfortable in my conclusion. And I forgot the third part of your question.
There's no chance of equivocal then?
No, there's no chance of equivocal. I'll also say that if there was additional information that came up that was reasonable, I mean, I would look at it, absolutely, just like any other case.
Dr. Lucas, I think early on you had told me you had done some research into other cases. In the literature, anywhere in the country, have you come across anything that has 4 elements: hanging, female, naked, bound?
Not that I'm aware of, but I think now there has been one.
I've got a study right here from 2008 from Dr. Simon, clinical professor of psychiatry and director of program in psychiatry and law at Georgetown University School of Medicine, who talks about naked suicides. And one of the causes, one of the methods of committing suicide that he talks about, in fact, it's evidence indicates it occurs more frequently when hanging. It's number 1 on his list of when it occurs. And then also it talks about reasons for doing it, and one of them is a rebirth and a cleansing type message you're sending. Self-abasement is the second, and the third one is atonement for guilt. And you know, we'll never know. We will never know the exact. Robert I. Simon, M.D. Okay. Well, can we? Let's do it one more time. Go ahead. Go ahead.
What language was the message in? He spoke in language.
English. Go ahead.
Did you get any sense of why that shirt was around her neck?
I'm not sure, but it clearly wasn't part of her death.
Okay. And did you find anything that told you that, I mean, you don't come up with findings like that, you know, on your own. Did you find something that she had looked on the internet or anything like that that suggested to you that she had thought this through, or how she figured out this?
We don't know. We're not sure that she could go back, if she was still with us, and recreate the knot she tied. She might have just trying to find a way to secure her hands.
So you didn't find anything where she looked on and Google?
I don't think we did. No.
Did you? No.
No. Go ahead. Outside of the bedroom door that she committed suicide from.
On the bedroom side or the hallway side?
The hallway side.
Was that her typical bedroom? Was that the room she stayed in?
No.
But it was the only bedroom with a balcony.
Sheriff, I just want to be clear. You're saying the ongoing criminal investigation is over, is that correct?
Yes.
So why?
Unless some new evidence came to light to cause us to reopen and take another look at this, our investigation is concluded. So, go ahead.
Were there any indications of hangings in her family history with other family members to use such a normally method of hanging herself?
We don't know.
Don't know.
What did you check? Did you check with the family?
We don't know if there's any family history. We didn't uncover anything like that.
Do you know what time she came back with Adam from the hospital?
When she came back from the hospital with Adam,
I think it was in the early evening.
would have been Tuesday, right?
Yes, I want to say
Not
7 or
Monday,
8 o'clock
Tuesday.
in that range.
Commander Lawton, can you describe Adam Shacknine's demeanor, at least in the 911 call? Did he seem calm during that call? Was he frantic? How would you describe it?
I would describe it as frantic. He wasn't sure the address of the house, where he was. He was trying to communicate to a dispatcher, where he was, but he didn't know the address, and so he was a little bit frantic.
Same thing with the initial call on Max Shacknine, the 13-year-old who made that call. Her demeanor?
The demeanor of the caller was not calm, but I would say in a little bit of shock. But there was clearly noise in the background indicating there was also some panic and concern there.
Sergeant, had Adam Shacknine been drinking at all that night that Rebecca died?
Not that we're aware of.
Okay. I see no more hands. Thank you all for being here.